Kenyon Williams, Professor of Percussion at Minnesota State University Moorhead. Today, I'd like to discuss this year's 2026 Minnesota All-State Mallet Etude. This is a challenging etude, and I want to give you 3 tips to help you do your absolute best at this year's auditions. To begin with, I want to make sure that you really take the time to understand the scales and the keys. This piece begins in E major, so make sure that you're practicing it with a solid stroke, a good sound on the instrument. And I recommend my students not do just 1 octave, but 2 octaves every time they do their scales and arpeggios, because then I begin with my left hand. And if I do my 2nd octave, now my right hand starts it. So I'm practicing my scale ambidextrously, left-handed here, right-handed here, and vice versa coming down. The same applies to arpeggios. Left hand lead, then right hand lead. Now, the next thing I would point out, of course, is something rather obvious, but many students don't stop to think about, is your mallet choice. Ideally, you'll be playing this on a marimba. If you're playing it on a marimba, you want to make sure you use a mallet that really highlights the sound of the instrument and allows you to play musically. If I choose a mallet that's too hard, for example, I like to use these innovative percussion mallets. Here's innovative percussion 400s. If I use these IP 400s, then at the very beginning, I start off with this sound right here. And right off the bat, I have this nasty xylophone, really harsh sound, and there's hard, especially when I get to the middle of the piece. I'm not getting you the warmth of the instrument. But vice versa, if I choose a mallet that's too soft, for example, these IP 200s, then at the beginning, I lose all my definition, and I get this sound. And I'm getting it's all kind of muffled sounding. Now in the middle section will sound wonderful, but even then, this high in the instrument, these mallets are a little bit too soft, and I'm not getting a whole lot of clarity. I really recommend for a piece like this, leaning towards the slightly harder side, because most of the notes in this piece are fairly fast. There's only one short section in the middle that has softer note sounds. So I recommend really these IP 300s, which are going to start off with a little bit of definition. So at the very beginning, I can hear clearly that, and then later on, when I move into my softer sections, I still have a nice, smooth roll sound. So carefully choose your mallets. Make sure they sound good for the entire etude, not just the first mallet you happen to have in your stick bag.
Dragons are sparking innovation and leading the way. At MSUM, your future starts now.
Tip number 2, make sure that you are thinking carefully about practicing slowly with proper stickings. Too many students start from day 1, and then the next day they come in right-handed, then left-handed, and so every time they practice, they're trying a different sticking. You always want to start with a pencil in your hand the very first time you start an etude and write in the stickings. Notice I said use a pencil, because you will change your mind, and that is okay, that's a good thing. But basic mallet sticking rules are simple. Alternate as much as possible. So in other words, at the beginning, I'm going to alternate, and try to avoid double stickings unless you have to. 2 in a row with the hand are okay, but for example, in measure number 2, that is much more preferable than 2 in a row, and then even 3 in a row. 3 in a row, never. Always be thinking about trying to alternate as much as you can, unless you absolutely have to do a double sticking. And in this piece, you really don't have to. Almost every sticking is pretty alternating, except for maybe 1 or 2 passages. Now that said, I want to point out something important. For example, when we get into measure number 2, we want to make sure we're starting that with the right hand. Then it flows naturally into my right hand in the next arpeggio. So I want to make sure that I'm starting my right. Whatever it takes then, that means I need to have started the first measure before that with my right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and I'm going on from there. So I end with my right hand. You always want to make sure that the stickings fit the music and do as little diddle as possible between notes. All right, that said, I also want to point out a very interesting little trick that happens in this piece that a lot of judges will be listening for, is making sure you're keeping your time straight. Practicing with a metronome is vital. Starting at 108, not a good idea. Start slow. Practice, I tell my students to de facto start at half speed and then work the way up from there. Ideally, start at a speed where you almost feel like you can't miss a note. So in this speed, oh, I already missed a note, so I'm going to then take it down 10 clicks. There there you go. And now I'm starting to get more accuracy. I need to make sure I'm with the metronome better, but I'm going to hold it steady. Now that said, one of the big things that a lot of students are going to miss this etude is in measure number 8 and measure number 12, that quarter note triplet. Make sure that if I take that quarter note triplet at tempo at 108, in measure number 8, I am thinking that even triplet. I teach my students to count triplets 1 la li. So for example then, that measure number 7, 1 la li, 2 la li, 3 la li, 4 la li, 1 la li, 2 li la. Make sure I'm thinking that even 2 li la So coming out of that triplet on the downbeat of measure 8, I have this sound right here. A lot of students are going to make this mistake. No, make sure that triplet is even right in there. 1 la li, 2 li la, and it lands on beat 4 with my metronome then. Okay, same thing is happening there in measure number 11. Make sure that I'm keeping that triplet coming into the quarter note triplet. I'm not rushing it. You're going to be tempted to go. No, take your time. 1 la li, 2 la li, 1 la li, 2 la li. And practice that with the metronome. Make sure it's absolutely perfect. Third and final point I would say is make sure you're playing this piece musically. So many students come into auditions and they may have the notes right, they may have good rhythms, but they're simply playing it like a robot or a machine. Make it musical. This piece has lots of wonderful moments where you can insert some of your own musicality. First off, start by making sure that you're playing the dynamics that are on the page. When you have a crescendo, make it a strong crescendo. So I'm not hearing, for example, in that first measure, we don't want to hear when you're practicing slowly, but rather, I'm going to crescendo through that. And I'm going to make sure I'm landing on that E and then coming down in my arpeggios after that. And then right here, huge jump. This is the loudest part of the entire piece. Big accents, especially the right hand and left hand both strong with accents on fortissimo, and then immediately soft on the mezzo forte. So we're really going to be listening for those dynamic changes like that. I want to point out an interesting one too. If you look at measure 13, you have an interesting issue. You have a staccato. How do you play staccato on a mallet instrument? Well, many people would say that you would simply stiffen your grip, grab your stick, and you would want to pop off quickly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and get that sound popped like that. Honestly, adding a little accent to it too might help a little bit. I would encourage you to explore even further than that. I tell my students a staccato should sound short. So what would make the note sound short? Well, there's different approaches. I could dampen. I could even try a dead stroke. Do I like that or not? Well, that's where you as a musician get to make a choice. Which one of those sounds better to you? Or just the stroke. I personally don't hear a whole lot of staccato in that stroke, so I would try to find a way to make that staccato really unique. Also, notice that when I get to the roll section here, especially in measure 16, really connect those rolls. Connect them smooth. And the way to practice getting those rolls smooth in measure 16 and even starting the measure before, measure 15, by starting 15, rather than simply practicing rolls, practice doing what's called block chords. In other words, you're going to hit the chord right there, and I'm going to hit 1, and instead of rolling in practice, I'm going to go 1 and a 2, 3, 4 and a 1 and a, right there. I'm going to think of these as 16th block chords. So in other words, in beat 2, 2, 3, 4 and 4E and go from there. So once I can do that whole passage smoothly without breaking my roll, without breaking my block chord, then I'm going to add my roll and focus on making it even and not let myself gallop, but steady. Notice I added some dynamics that weren't on the page. Rather than simply playing that last half of measure 16, I added a decrescendo. Or I could go the other way. And kind of crescendo and then drop off. Now, this is where we must pay close attention that there are slurs in the piece. There are dynamic phrase marks. I definitely want to separate that roll from this. I shouldn't go, no. There's a definite break there. A choir, if they were singing that, 4 and 1, 2, 3, would breathe 3 and come in on 4. So you want to make sure that you reflect that sound of the choir, 3. Notice that gap. That's so much more musical and so much more interesting than just playing like a robot straight through. One other little tidbit that I would point out is the really interesting slurs that happen in measure number 7 and 8. We want to make sure as we're coming off those triplets at the end and beat 3 and 4, notice it's not written like this. It's not written as... No. There's a slur mark. So we should hear di-da, 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 da-da. How do I do that? Simple. Accent the first note of the slur, make the second note of the slur slightly softer. So in slow, if I take it slowly, it would sound like this. Okay? Sped up, you can hear the slur more clearly. So I want to hear bi-da, bi-da. So again, it's not a full accent. It's I think of it more as a tenuto, a weight, basically a half accent, if you will. Di-da. And the second note behind the slur, the one that finishes it, then slightly softer. So di-da. Like that. So apply those principles, practice your scales, practice with that metronome, move slowly, and make sure you've got great stickings, good dynamics. With musicality, you're going to do great. I hope to see you at this year's All-State.